Lucille O'Neill decided to treat herself to a nice dinner at a local favorite, a cozy yet popular restaurant known for its inviting atmosphere and delicious food. It was a sunny Friday evening, the kind that called for a pleasant meal to start the weekend right. Lucille, wearing a casual yet elegant dress, entered the restaurant with a smile, her presence gentle and unassuming. As she walked in, the restaurant buzzed with the chatter of diners enjoying their meals and the clinking of glasses. The warm glow from the overhead lights cast a soothing ambience, and the aroma of grilled steak and baked bread filled the air, making her look forward to what she hoped would be a delightful culinary experience. Finding a comfortable spot in a quiet corner of the restaurant, Lucille took a seat with a view of the lovely interior garden. The garden was beautifully lit, with string lights twinkling among the foliage and flowers, adding a touch of magic to the place. She picked up the menu, browsing through the pages filled with various enticing dishes. As she decided on what to order, Lucille noticed other diners receiving attentive service from the restaurant staff. Waiters moved gracefully around, taking orders, serving food, and ensuring everyone was having a good time. However, as time passed, Lucille realized that no waiter had come to her table yet. She tried catching the eye of any passing staff member, giving them a polite nod or a gentle wave, but it seemed as though she was invisible to them. Initially, Lucille thought they must be busy and decided to wait a few more minutes, giving them the benefit of the doubt. But even as she waited patiently, her initial excitement began to wane. She watched as new customers entered, got seated, and were promptly attended to. While she sat there, still waiting, it was becoming increasingly clear that she was being deliberately ignored, which was puzzling and disheartening to her. Despite feeling a mix of confusion and disappointment, Lucille maintained her composure. She was determined not to let the situation ruin her evening, clinging to the hope that perhaps there was a simple misunderstanding that would soon be resolved. As she sat there, waiting with quiet dignity, she couldn't help but wonder why she was being treated this way. In the back of her mind, Lucille knew she deserved the same respect and attention as every other diner in that restaurant. As the minutes ticked by, her resolve strengthened, not to confront or cause a scene, but to handle the situation with the grace and patience she had always believed in. Little did she know, the evening was about to take an unexpected turn that would change everything. The evening wore on, and Lucille remained seated at her quiet corner table, her initial patience gradually morphing into discomfort. Despite her attempts to get noticed, the waitstaff continued to bypass her table, as if there was an invisible barrier around it. Other patrons were laughing and chatting as they dined, enjoying the lively atmosphere of the restaurant, which only highlighted her isolation. Trying a different approach, Lucille raised her hand slightly when a young waiter walked nearby, hoping to catch his attention. But just as it seemed he would come over, he abruptly turned away to attend to a group of loud diners who had just walked in. The group was immediately welcomed with warm greetings and quick service, making Lucille feel even more overlooked. The rejection stung. Lucille couldn't understand what made her so different from the other guests. She looked around, noting that she was well-dressed and behaved as any other guest in the restaurant. Her mind raced as she considered the possibilities, but none of them made sense. She was just another customer looking to enjoy a meal. Feeling a mix of sadness and frustration, Lucille continued to sit quietly, her thoughts now turning inward. She wondered if there was something off about her appearance, or if perhaps there was a mistake with her seating. She considered leaving, but then decided against it. She didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of thinking they could treat her this way without consequence. As she sat there, Lucille began to observe the waiter more closely. She noticed his interactions with other customers, his body language, and his expressions. It became apparent that his avoidance was intentional. The realization hurt, but it also ignited a spark of resolve within her. Lucille knew she deserved better and decided she would not leave until she was served, no matter how long it took. Meanwhile, the waiter continued his rounds, laughing and chatting with other diners, completely ignoring Lucille's presence. His behavior was baffling to her. In her many years, Lucille had dined in countless establishments and had never been treated with such disregard. The situation felt surreal, as though she were part of a bad dream. Just then, a family with young children took the table next to hers. They were immediately greeted and their orders were taken. The contrast in treatment was stark and clear. Lucille watched as the children giggled, blissfully unaware of the tension around them. Their innocence brought a small smile to her face, a brief respite from her growing indignation. Determined not to let this experience mar her evening entirely, Lucille tried once more to flag down a server, this time a bit more assertively. She cleared her throat and called out a polite, "Excuse me," when the waiter was passing relatively close to her table. But again, her attempt was met with disregard, as the waiter hurried off without so much as a glance in her direction. At this point, Lucille's patience was wearing thin. She was a woman of great dignity and respect, accustomed to giving and receiving basic courtesy. The blatant disrespect from the waiter was not only disappointing, but also deeply upsetting. It was then that she decided, if the situation did not resolve soon, she would have to take a stand, not just for herself, but for the principle of the matter. As the minutes turned into an hour, Lucille's resolve hardened. Her initial discomfort had transformed into a quiet determination. She sat back in her chair, her posture composed yet firm, embodying the quiet strength that had seen her through many challenges in life. Lucille was no stranger to adversity, but the blatant disregard she faced that evening was both puzzling and distressing. Around her, the restaurant continued its lively buzz, with diners enjoying their meals and the waitstaff bustling about. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, a stark contrast to the silent treatment Lucille was experiencing. She couldn't help but feel a sense of alienation, as though she were invisible within the vibrant atmosphere of the restaurant. Despite the growing urge to confront the waiter or even leave the restaurant, Lucille chose to stay. She believed in handling situations with grace, and she hoped that eventually someone would notice the oversight and correct it. With every passing moment, her presence became more pronounced, a quiet testament to her unwillingness to be overlooked. In an effort to pass the time and distract herself from the growing irritation, Lucille took out her phone and began to scroll through messages and news, occasionally looking up to observe the interactions around her. It was then that she overheard a conversation between two waitstaff near the bar. They were discussing the upcoming shift change and the arrival of a new manager for the night. This bit of information sparked a glimmer of hope in Lucille. Perhaps the new manager would notice the oversight and rectify the situation. As she waited for the shift change, Lucille reflected on her life's experiences, the challenges she had overcome, and the respect she had always endeavored to show and receive. She thought about her family, her children, and how she had always taught them to treat others with kindness and fairness, regardless of the circumstances. Finally, a new figure appeared on the floor, a woman with a friendly face and an assertive stride, clearly the manager. Lucille watched as she efficiently checked in with the staff and glanced over the restaurant. It didn't take long for the manager to notice something amiss at Lucille's table. With a concerned expression, she approached Lucille, her approach marking a turning point in the evening. The manager greeted Lucille warmly, apologizing for any wait she might have experienced and asking if she had been helped yet. Lucille explained the situation calmly and with dignity, her voice steady despite the frustration she felt. The manager was immediately apologetic, her face registering surprise and concern over such an oversight. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the manager assured Lucille that she would personally take care of her for the rest of the evening. She quickly took Lucille's order and promised to expedite her meal. As the manager walked away to place the order, Lucille felt a mix of relief and validation. Her patience had paid off, and finally, she was receiving the attention and respect she deserved. As she awaited her meal, Lucille's thoughts turned to the broader implications of her experience. It was a poignant reminder of the importance of vigilance in defending one's dignity and the impact of kindness and professionalism in any service industry. The incident, though unsettling, reaffirmed her beliefs in standing firm and respectful, no matter the situation. With the new manager's intervention, Lucille's evening finally began to look up. The manager, having taken Lucille's order, returned promptly with a complimentary appetizer as a gesture of goodwill. She apologized once more for the oversight and assured Lucille that her meal would be served shortly. Lucille, appreciative of the manager's efforts to correct the error, thanked her for the kindness and professionalism. As Lucille sampled the appetizer, a delicious bruschetta topped with ripe tomatoes and fresh basil, her mood lightened. The food was delightful, and the manager's attentive service made her feel valued. It was a stark contrast to the earlier part of her evening. The change in service quality was not only a relief, but also a pleasant surprise that restored her faith in the restaurant. Meanwhile, word had begun to spread among the staff about the earlier mistake. The waiter who had ignored Lucille seemed uneasy, stealing glances towards her table. His previous confidence diminished. Other staff members whispered among themselves, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Outside the restaurant, the evening continued to buzz with activity. Unbeknownst to Lucille, her son, Shaquille O'Neal, had arrived in town and decided to surprise her with a visit. He had heard from a family friend that his mother was dining alone at this restaurant, and he thought it would be a perfect opportunity to join her. Shaquille entered the restaurant, his towering presence turning heads immediately. Guests and staff alike whispered in excitement, their eyes wide with recognition. The atmosphere shifted from casual dining to a stir of celebrity excitement. Shaquille scanned the room, his eyes searching for his mother. When he spotted her, a broad smile spread across his face. As Shaquille made his way through the restaurant, the staff scrambled to accommodate him, their earlier neglect of Lucille now a glaring error in light of her celebrity son's presence. The waiter who had ignored Lucille felt a sinking feeling, realizing the gravity of his mistake. He watched helplessly as Shaquille approached Lucille's table, greeting her with a warm, affectionate hug that drew smiles from the surrounding diners. Lucille, surprised and delighted by her son's unexpected visit, introduced him to the manager. Shaquille thanked the manager for looking after his mother, his voice gentle yet carrying an unspoken authority. The manager, equally surprised and honored by his presence, assured him that they were doing their best to make up for the earlier oversight. As mother and son settled into their seats, the restaurant's atmosphere was abuzz with excitement. Diners stole glances at Shaquille and Lucille, their earlier isolation forgotten amidst the celebrity buzz. The staff, eager to make amends, provided exemplary service, making sure that Lucille and Shaquille's evening was as enjoyable as possible. In this newly transformed setting, Lucille and Shaquille enjoyed their meal together, talking and laughing over delicious food. The evening, which had started with disappointment, turned into a memorable night filled with joy and family love. Lucille felt a profound sense of gratitude for her son's support and the unexpected turn of events that had transformed her once solitary dinner into a celebration of family and recognition. This part aims to keep the story engaging by introducing a celebrity element and turning the evening around for Lucille, ensuring the audience remains interested and entertained. Lucille smiled warmly as she looked across the table at her son, Shaquille O'Neal. The earlier frustration of being ignored by the waiter had faded, replaced by the happiness of an unexpected family moment. Shaquille, always the loving son, could sense that something had been off before he arrived. He knew his mother well. Her expression, though calm, carried a trace of something unspoken. As they began to eat, Shaquille took a sip of water and asked casually, "Everything good, ma?" His voice was gentle but firm, his way of letting her know that he was there for her. Lucille hesitated for a moment, not wanting to dwell on the negative. She had always been a woman of grace, someone who believed in choosing her battles wisely. But as she glanced at the waiter, who now looked nervous, avoiding eye contact with them, she knew her son would find out sooner or later. With a soft sigh, she placed her fork down and gave Shaquille a small smile. "It's fine now," she said. The manager took care of it. Shaquille raised an eyebrow. took care of what? Lucille, in her usual composed way, briefly explained what had happened. She told him how she had sat there waiting while the waiter ignored her, how she had seen others getting served before her, and how she had finally been noticed only when the manager came over. She didn't say it with anger, just as a matter of fact. But that was enough for Shaquille. His relaxed posture straightened, and his eyes narrowed slightly. He glanced over at the waiter, who was now pretending to be busy, avoiding his gaze. The entire restaurant had been watching him from the moment he walked in, and now, sensing a shift in his energy, people turned their attention to see what would happen next. Shaquille wasn't the kind of person to cause a scene. He had always been taught to handle things with dignity, just like his mother. But that didn't mean he would ignore what had happened. He waved the manager over, his expression calm but serious. The manager, still eager to make things right, approached quickly. "Is everything okay, Mr. O'Neill?" she asked politely. Shaquille nodded. "Yeah, everything's fine. But I just want to ask, how long was my mom sitting here before she got served?" The manager hesitated, clearly caught in a difficult spot. She glanced at Lucille, then at the waiter, who had now frozen in place, looking pale. "Too long," she admitted honestly. Shaquille nodded again. His voice was even, but there was an undeniable authority in his tone. "I get it. Mistakes happen. But that's my mom. And whether it's my mom or someone else, nobody deserves to be ignored like that." The restaurant was silent now, everyone listening. The waiter, realizing there was no escape, stepped forward hesitantly. I didn't mean to," he began, but his voice faltered. Lucille, ever the graceful woman, looked at him with kindness rather than anger. "I just hope you remember this moment," she said gently, "because respect should be given to everyone, no matter who they are." The waiter lowered his head, clearly ashamed. He mumbled an apology, and Shaquille gave a slight nod, accepting it, but also making it clear that the lesson should not be forgotten. The air in the restaurant changed after that. The energy, once tense, became lighter. People whispered among themselves, impressed by how the situation had been handled. Lucille and Shaquille went back to their meal, enjoying their time together, while the waiter, now humbled, worked extra hard to ensure every customer was treated with fairness. For Lucille, the night had turned into something more than just a dinner. It had become a lesson, not just for the waiter, but for everyone who had witnessed it. And as she looked at her son, her heart swelled with pride, knowing that she had raised a man who stood for what was right, not through anger, but through respect and wisdom. After the brief but important conversation, the restaurant slowly returned to its usual atmosphere. The sound of clinking glasses, soft music, and friendly chatter filled the air again. But something had changed. The energy in the room felt different. There was a newfound sense of awareness among the staff and diners, as if they had all silently agreed to be more mindful of how people were treated. Lucille, now fully relaxed, smiled as she took another bite of her meal. The food was delicious, and for the first time that evening, she felt truly comfortable. Her son, Shaquille, was right beside her, enjoying his meal as well. The moment of tension had passed, and now it was just a mother and son sharing a dinner, catching up on life. "You know, man, this kind of thing happens more than people realize," Shaquille said, taking a sip of his drink. "Some folks just don't think before they act." Lucille nodded, dabbing her mouth gently with her napkin. "It's not about making a scene," she said. "It's about reminding people that everyone deserves kindness and respect, whether they recognize you or not." Shaquille smiled at his mother's wisdom. He had always admired her for her patience and the way she carried herself with dignity. Even in moments where she had every right to be upset, she chose grace instead. Across the room, the waiter who had ignored Lucille continued working, but now his approach was noticeably different. He was more attentive, making sure every table was served properly. He had learned a lesson that night, and though he still felt guilty, he knew that the best way to make up for it was to be better moving forward. The restaurant manager, still feeling responsible for what had happened, came over once more to check in. "Mrs. O'Neill, Mr. O'Neill, is everything to your liking?" she asked with a respectful tone. Lucille gave a warm smile. "Yes, dear. Thank you for stepping in earlier." The manager sighed in relief. "It's the least I could do, and I assure you, this will not happen again to you or anyone else here." Shaquille gave a small nod of approval. "That's good to hear," he said, "because no one should have to wait to be treated like they matter." The manager agreed wholeheartedly and excused herself, ensuring the rest of the staff kept up their improved service. Meanwhile, other diners who had witnessed the incident seemed inspired. Some smiled at Lucille and Shaquille, showing their silent support. Others appeared deep in thought, perhaps reflecting on their own experiences or how they treated people in their daily lives. Lucille glanced at her son and reached across the table, patting his large hand gently. "You always know how to make things right," she said. Shaquille chuckled. "I learned from the best." With that, they continued their meal, enjoying the moment, knowing that what had started as a frustrating evening had turned into something much greater, a lesson in kindness, fairness, and the quiet power of standing up for what is right. This part keeps the story engaging while reinforcing the themes of dignity, fairness, and personal growth. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments. As the evening continued, Lucille and Shaquille enjoyed their meal together, sharing stories and laughter. The earlier discomfort had faded, replaced by warmth and joy. The restaurant, once tense with awkwardness, now felt like any other pleasant dining experience. The other guests who had watched everything unfold seemed to carry a newfound respect for the mother and son sitting at the table. Lucille noticed that the waiter who had ignored her was still stealing glances at them, his expression troubled. It was clear that he regretted his actions, but he was unsure how to make things right. He continued serving the other tables, now moving with more attentiveness, but there was hesitation in his steps whenever he looked in Lucille's direction. Eventually, after much internal struggle, the waiter gathered his courage and slowly approached their table. His hands were nervously clasped in front of him, and his face showed clear remorse. "Ma'am, Mr. O'Neill," he started hesitantly. Lucille and Shaquille both looked up. Shaquille said nothing, simply watching the waiter with his usual calm but firm expression. Lucille, always one to give people a chance, met his eyes with quiet patience. I just wanted to say I'm really sorry," the waiter continued. "I was wrong to ignore you. There's no excuse for it. I should have treated you with the same respect as every other customer." Lucille studied him for a moment, sensing the sincerity in his words. He seemed genuinely ashamed, and it took courage for him to come forward and admit his mistake. "Apology accepted," she said gently. "I only hope that you'll remember this moment and treat everyone with kindness, no matter who they are." The waiter nodded quickly. "I will. I promise." Shaquille, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. "It's not about us," he said, his deep voice steady but kind. "It's about the next person who walks in here. The next mother sitting alone. The next customer who just wants a good meal and fair treatment. You get what I'm saying?" The waiter swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir. I do." Shaquille gave a small nod of approval. "Good." With that, the waiter, still looking humbled but relieved, turned and returned to his work, determined to prove that he had learned from his mistake. Lucille felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had not raised her voice, demanded special treatment, or sought revenge. Instead, she had taught a lesson, one that would hopefully stay with the waiter for the rest of his life. Shaquille, always proud of his mother's wisdom, smiled at her. "You always handle things better than I ever could," he said with admiration. Lucille chuckled. "I just do what I know is right." As the evening drew to a close, they finished their meal, both feeling lighter than before. The night had turned out differently than expected, but in the best way possible. And in the heart of the restaurant, a lesson had been learned, not just by the waiter, but by everyone who had witnessed the power of dignity, respect, and kindness. As the evening came to an end, Lucille and Shaquille sat back in their chairs, enjoying the last moments of their dinner. The once tense atmosphere of the restaurant had transformed into something much more comfortable. The warm glow of the overhead lights, the soft background music, and the hum of quiet conversations made the space feel inviting again. Lucille looked around and noticed how much had changed in just a short time. The waiter who had ignored her was now working diligently, making sure every guest was taken care of. The restaurant manager moved around the floor with an alert but pleasant expression, ensuring that no other guest experienced what Lucille had. Even some of the other diners who had witnessed everything seemed to carry a different energy, more aware, more understanding. The power of small moments never ceased to amaze Lucille. What had started as a simple dinner had turned into something much bigger, a lesson, a reminder, and a quiet act of change. Shaquille stretched his arms, letting out a satisfied sigh. "That was a good meal," he said with a grin. "And an interesting night." Lucille chuckled. "I didn't expect all of this," she admitted. "I just wanted to have dinner." Shaquille nodded. "Yeah, but sometimes life gives you a little extra." The bill arrived, but before Lucille could reach for it, Shaquille grabbed it first. "You know I got this," he said with a wink. Lucille shook her head with a knowing smile. "I suppose I'll allow it this time." The waiter, still looking humbled from their earlier conversation, approached again. This time, he didn't seem nervous, just genuine. "Mrs. O'Neill, Mr. O'Neill," he said softly, "your meal has been taken care of by the restaurant. It's the least we can do to make up for earlier." Lucille's eyebrows lifted slightly. She hadn't expected that. It was a kind gesture, one that showed not just guilt, but a true effort to make things right. She gave the waiter a kind smile. "Thank you," she said. "But remember, the real way to make up for it is to keep treating everyone with the respect they deserve." The waiter nodded. "I will." Shaquille, always lighthearted, added with a grin, "And if not, I'll be back." The waiter laughed nervously, knowing that Shaquille's words carried weight. As Lucille and Shaquille stood to leave, many eyes in the restaurant followed them, not because of Shaquille's fame, but because of the way they had handled the entire situation. Their quiet dignity, patience, and wisdom had left an impression on everyone who had witnessed it. Outside, the cool evening air greeted them as they stepped onto the sidewalk. Shaquille turned to his mother. "Want me to walk you to your car?" Lucille smiled. "Always." As they walked together, arm in arm, Lucille felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for her son, but for the lessons that life continued to teach, no matter how unexpected they were. That night, she didn't just have dinner. She had reminded someone of the power of respect, and in doing so, she had left a mark far greater than any meal ever could.